And this is where I always tell people, look, follow the money.
It requires effort. It requires engagement, true engagement. You got to say yes. Some way, somehow, say yes.
That's where the innovation comes. We cannot be complacent.
Welcome everyone to episode 26 of Move, Crush, Count. This is a podcast that is sponsored and produced by J&L Marketing. I am your host, Scott Joseph. We have a special guest today, Amberlys Joseph. No relation, all right, but she is an expert when it comes to recognizing where new profit opportunities exist. And I think that's important because this show is all about helping businesses, if you're feeling pressured being commoditized or marginalized, right? New profit opportunities can be critical or key to your long-term growth and success. So she does an outstanding job of where she finds these opportunities, and she walks us through this. So let's introduce Amberlys Joseph.
You're listening to Move, Crush, Count, hosted by Scott Joseph.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Move, Crush, Count. This is a podcast that's produced and sponsored by J&L Marketing. I'm your host, Scott Joseph. I am here with a special guest, and this is an easy name for me to remember, Amberlys Joseph.
Thank you so much for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, no relation.
No relation. That is true. No relation.
So we're going to make that clear up front. But today we're going to talk about how do we recognize new profit opportunities. And I think it's important right now, especially with a lot of business leaders. We're coming through COVID. A lot of business leaders have had to ask strong questions to try and find out what are some new profit opportunities. Other businesses, depending, I guess, on the vertical you're in, didn't have those same challenges. Sure. But the reason I view you as an expert in this field has nothing to do with COVID. It's just that as you look at your resume, which we'll go over with soon here, an incredible job of like adapting and changing and recognizing these new opportunities and running with them. And so we'll cover some of that, and then if you want, we'll just dive right in.
Sure.
All right. So let's first get the audience familiar with who you are, right? Maybe share a little bit about your background, your experience, and we can kind of go from there. What gets you started in business?
Sure. So I'm lucky. I have parents and grandparents that are entrepreneurs, right? And I worked for a marketing company specific to automotive. And quite frankly, I really thought I could do it better and with more integrity. And so I worked for a company for a while, and I called my dad. I said, I really think I can do this on my own. And initially, right, as the daughter of a young girl, I was 24 at the time, he really thought, okay, this is going to be a lot of work, right? I mean, maybe you should marry somebody.
It's hard to
marry
believe
a doctor, right? Are you sure you want to embark on this?
It's hard to
adventure?
believe you've only done this for 4 years.
So kind. So kind. I love that. So I'm 17 years in automotive at this point, so you can do the math. But needless to say, when I called him and he said, are you sure you want to do this? He was in full support at that point. And he jokes, he says he put me in business. And I said, well, yes, you did. That dusty old furniture from your office that you put in my crummy little office, I guess that's true, right? But, I was lucky. I worked for an automotive marketing company, and I realized quickly that I liked dealers. They were fun to work with. They're hardworking, but they spend a lot of money in marketing. And I'll also tell you, though, it's interesting. The gal that trained me the first time, she didn't train me. She didn't tell me anything about what I was selling. Yeah. Her advice was show up in a skirt, and that was it. And I'm just being really candid. Yeah. And so I did. And I sold stuff that day, and I sold stuff lots of days after that. But, there really got to a point where that would get me in the door, but I had to follow through with something strong to keep me in the door. Yeah. And so, listen, I'm lucky. I'm grateful. I've sold a lot of marketing to dealers for a long time, but, I've had entrepreneurial parents and grandparents that said, figure it out. Right? You can do it.
Well, and to the theme of this entire interview, recognizing new opportunities and especially when it comes to profit and growth, you didn't stick with just marketing. You still do that.
I do.
But it's not like you're only going there. And I think that's so your ability to adapt and change to what's needed by your customers, because you stayed within the same vertical though.
I did. And so I started out selling just direct mail, right? When there were radio remotes and greeters and balloons and gifts and insurance and the whole event, right? And we just don't do that anymore.
No.
And so for a long time, we did just direct mail, right? And then we changed to special finance mail, and then we added BDCs, and then but now, of course, I don't sell very much direct mail. I sell some. I still have some dealers that do it, of course, to their database. Those are still important pieces of it. But now it's all digital, right? And then you have to figure out how to hone that digital to where it's not just fluff, right? Because there's a lot of things out there that really don't work, but you can make them look like they do based on the stats, right?
What clicked for you? So let's go back to the beginning when you were selling dealers and you said that, all right, you know what, I need something more substantial, whether it's to re-sign customers, things like that. Obviously, the product has to work for you.
Sure.
Dealers are very quick on marketing. If it doesn't sell them cars,
right out of the gates.
Yeah, they want to see results now. And so what are some of the things, but I'm not interested in the product as much as you personally, like what kind of clicked, where was your aha moment or what happened for you where you were like, I can do this, but more importantly, I can take this to a much bigger level than maybe what I've taught or learned up to this point?
I would say transparency, right? I felt like in the space that I was in, I had an opportunity to really just do what I said I was going to do, right? Be fully transparent on making sure I bought the best quality lists, right? I sent all the mail, right? I did it when I said I was going to. I followed my deadlines. And if I missed a deadline, then I would eat the first class to get it there on time. That I would do what I said I was going to do. That I promised you I'd have this event during this time, that I would do it, right? And it, quite frankly, that took me a long way, just doing what I said I was going to do.
What got you into dealer merchant? Why that? Why dealer merchant services?
So it's interesting. So I took some time off.
Let's explain. I'll give you a quick few minutes to do a quick plug on this, I guess.
Sure.
Explain to the audience what this is, because one of the things and one of the reasons I was excited to interview you is because to me, this is not limited to just automotive.
No, it's
all right?
not.
And I think anybody listening out there is new legislation. I'll let you explain it, but there's new legislation out there that allows this, which you're about to talk about, was not available before. And it can be money that is saved instantly right to the bottom line of any business that does a lot of transactions with credit cards, correct?
Sure. So Dealer Merchant Services is a proprietary model that helps dealerships and all businesses create a dual price strategy. And what we do is give the customer, similar to what you see in a gas station, a cash price and a credit price. And so the laws have recently changed.
Did gas stations used to do that prior to this legislation?
So it's a good question. So where it really started was that the big banks were basically colluding against debit card fees specifically. And so what happened is that it costs those banks less to process a debit card than it does a credit card, because those are run on Visa MasterCard rails, right? Yep. And so, but they were pocketing the difference, right? And so there was a huge class action lawsuit against them that said, you guys can't do this. You guys can't collude against us. You can't have these huge fees. For example, in other developed countries in Europe and things like that, they charge on average 0.25%. An average dealership, for example, and they have some of the most aggressive rates, are typically between 1.75 and 2%. So we're talking 7 times other developed countries just in expenses, right? So there's a huge margin that these big banks are receiving for that. So that's where all of this shifted. And so then it actually went all the way to the Supreme Court. They found that it was a First Amendment right for businesses to be able to tell their customers if they used a different form of payment that they could save money. Really simple, right? But the card brands have these agreements that say you can't charge your customers. Yeah. And so what we've done is we have terminals, we have technology, all of these things that are backed by a U.S. patent that allows businesses to be able to increase their revenue by a small amount simply to cover those expenses. And so what's interesting is I've been in the dealership space. I'm grateful that I've been an entrepreneur my entire career, right? And I saw an opportunity. And some of those conversations happen when you're sitting with the dealership and they're looking at the financials and they don't know how they're going to trim the fat, right? And typically marketing's the first one they cut. You can certainly
if
relate
times
to
go
that.
down, they do. We don't. At J&L, we don't participate in recessions.
No, likewise. Well, but that's a different conversation, right? If they're spending $3 and $1 in a recession, right? It's equivalent to $3,
Yeah.
right? So
let me ask you this: At what point did you sit there and say, "There's an opportunity here, and more importantly, a need where I think I can help dealer clients with this"? What happened? Where was that moment?
So I started learning about the entire program, and I realized, of course.
Let's back up.
Okay.
Take it back even further.
Okay.
All right. I want you to tell me, because if this show is about recognizing opportunity, what clicked in your brain to where you said, "Oh, wait a minute. It had to happen before the research, or you wouldn't have done the research."
No, of course. So I took some time off.
Okay.
I had some babies, and I also had a brain tumor. I know we've talked a little bit about this. And so when I got back into knowing I wanted to be back at work full time, right? I still have my marketing company. I'm still doing some of those things, but I started reaching out to colleagues in the entirety of the automotive space. Not just in marketing, not just dealers that I knew before, but what are you working on? What's working? What's not working? What are you seeing out there, right? I just started, anybody that would have a conversation with me to tell me what's going on in the space and the industry, right? And so I had many, many conversations, some that turned into great relationships, and some were just, fact finding on both sides. Like, how can I help you? I've got a portfolio of dealers I've worked with for a long, long time. Do you have something that makes sense? And so I started hearing about this around and understanding that there's surcharge programs, there's fees. And so what I started to realize is that this is a great program, but if it doesn't work for dealers because we're so customer centric, it won't work.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've done a few things that I feel like are unique to our business for dealer merchant services is that, okay, if a dealer wants to give them a true cash equivalent, right, they're not coming in with cash and checks, right? So then we created this electronic option. And so we have a PIN debit option for ours, right? Whereas some of these businesses have just surcharge.
All right.
And not to get too far out in the weeds of the details, but quite frankly, we've created the program specific to dealers because it wouldn't work otherwise, right? And so I started learning about it, and there were just merchant processors that are trying to go into dealerships. And I'm thinking, okay, and there's just these crummy signs and there's no training. And so we kind of wanted to create a full scope for dealers to be successful so that they didn't call me 6 months ago, Amberly, that was fine, but I've got tons of pissed off customers and I don't want to work with them.
Well, and what's great about taking it to dealers, so for you, it's a natural fit because that's where your client base was. But what's also great about dealers is, and Move Crush Count is a show that we really want to help people that are feeling pressures on their margin, right? And the auto industry clearly is feeling a lot of pressure when it comes to their gross margins. And the internet creates that. And I like to say being painted into this commodity corner. I say it all the time.
Yeah.
So looking for ways and opportunities to become more profitable is critical.
No question. And where I feel like is so interesting, Scott, is as I started to learn about it, I started to do an enormous amount of research, right? Because I started talking to dealers about it. Like, do you know about it? And they'd say, yeah, I like it, but they'd start asking me these big, important questions that I didn't have the answer to. Right? So then I did an enormous amount of research. But what was funny is most of them aren't even aware of how much they're spending in these fees because it's an expense that they didn't know that they could even look at or get around.
That's the key, right? They don't look at it other than when they're negotiating their merchant service agreement initially, maybe the percentage.
Sure.
And then they feel like,
They'd
well,
save
I've
a
already
couple of basis
negotiated
points.
that but it's a fee that it's a part of doing business.
Sure. And I had a conversation with the CEO recently and he said, well, are you just calling to save me some basis points on this? And I said, no. This is an entirely new strategy.
Yep.
And it's just the same conversation you and I had is what's your interest in talking to me? Well, to me, I felt like, okay, people need to be aware, just like the CEO of Venmo. He changed this one strategy and his business became wildly more profitable.
For the people who don't know that strategy, what was it?
So he created to where when people are transferring money online, and so Venmo has 40 million users, PayPal has 228 million users, Cash App is similar, they have 10 million users. And what happens is if you use a bank account, you don't pay additional fee. If you use a credit card, you pay that fee. And I would imagine if I could look at those statistics, I bet it's split down the middle. Some people want the convenience and don't want to pay it. Some people don't care.
Yeah.
So interestingly, it said, okay, because 5 years ago, I don't think consumers would have been as conditioned to be able to take on a new strategy like this. And so when you see PayPal...
That's an interesting point. We just did an interview with another gentleman, and it was all about innovation. All right. And he said, timing's important as well because, I think he gave the example, if Steve Jobs had come out with the iPhone in '85, it would have been irrelevant because we didn't have internet.
Sure.
So you are right in that sense that here's an opportunity, but the opportunity becomes more so because the marketplace is more willing to accept it, right? And
sure.
And in the end, that's the only vote that matters.
Of course. And so when I started learning about it, they said, okay, well, this is a no-brainer. Well, that's sometimes true, except if you don't know how to execute it. And I can say that my experience working with dealers, understanding that you have to hold their hand a little bit. But this, as I've learned in launching these live in dealerships, it really affects almost everyone in the store, right? We train the accounting department because they have to take in that additional revenue and put it in the right places, right? Yeah. They have to make sure that all of their reporting matches, right? We've got to make sure that the cashiers and the service advisors and everybody's trained on the new word track. F&I, same, right? So it's one of these things where you have to get everyone's buy-in. This isn't a merchant provider where you can send them a box of terminals and wish them well, right? This isn't how this is going to go down for it to be successful.
Right.
And so, but at the same time, it's such a huge savings. I mean, I have one Toyota store that will save $250,000 next year by himself. Just one single point store.
Yeah.
It's an enormous amount of savings.
And it's not costing, in fact, it's not costing customers any money. In fact, it's saving a large percentage of customers money.
Sure.
So it's truly it's a win for everyone on that. So, which is a great solution.
It is. And I think because every dealer asks me the same thing.
I feel like I'm selling for you.
You're doing a fantastic job, I have to say. I mean, can I afford you, Scott? I guess that's the question. I don't think I can. But yes, I think the way that we roll it out is key, right? Because I certainly have some competitors in the space. And for us, because we know automotive, I think it's our advantage.
Yeah.
For sure.
What roadblocks, and you've kind of touched on a little of them, like you'd already said that you'd gotten questions, maybe you didn't know how to answer, so you had to go back.
Sure.
But what other roadblocks did you face early on? You don't have to limit this to dealer merchant services. I think you can go back throughout your career,
sure,
wherever you feel like the best example is, because what you've done, what I recognize is like I said, you recognize opportunities, and you're getting that information by keeping your ear, tuned into what your customers are saying,
sure,
their clients are saying, what are their needs, what do they want, more importantly, why, and you're finding solutions, right, to help them. So what roadblocks throughout your career did you run into, and how did you overcome them? So
it's interesting because when I very first started, I would say that in year 1 through 3, right, you're running on sheer momentum, right? Excitement. Like, oh my gosh, I started a business and it's actually working, and people are buying from me and I have this business. And then you start to, just like we talked about on one of your shows, right? Michael Gerber and the E-Myth and all these things, right? Is that you're so busy working in it that you're not working on it,
yes,
right? And so I would say the biggest challenge when I had my marketing company is how do I scale this, right? And how do I get my arms wrapped around it enough where my customers wanted me. They knew that when I sat in front of them, I was going to tell them everything I knew. I knew I couldn't promise them results always in marketing, but I could do everything in my power to make it successful.
Yeah.
And they knew that unequivocally when they sat with me. Whereas, as I started to scale, I didn't know how to duplicate that. And so whereas this, I think the biggest thing is I want to make sure it's scalable, because I really believe once we start educating the customers, educating the dealers on how to roll it out, then we can create a really slick plan to launch it at the dealerships, make sure they're successful. And for me, the biggest thing is scalability, because I don't want it to be all about me, because I've started to learn from so many people around me. So you're asking about the challenges. Is in the beginning, you're just thrilled to be in business, right? But you don't know that you need to scale,
correct,
right? I'm sure you talk to young entrepreneurs all the time, and they're, burning the candle at both ends, and they're doing all the things, and you think, no. You got to figure out how to scale.
I am called by, especially if it's a true digital agency, probably no less than 20 times a day, CEOs, and how do I, because there's not a huge percentage anymore. It's not wild, wild west anymore. The market is what it is, and it's pretty transparent. Here's what I'm paying Google. Here's what I'm paying Facebook.
Sure.
And so your percentage markup to manage that and do it effectively is going to be a set amount, right? The higher, if a client has a $10,000 a month budget and your fee's $2,500, well, that's a pretty good chunk that's not being spent on Google, Facebook, or wherever.
Sure.
So their question to me is they struggle with scaling because as they add more and more clients, they've also got to add people to be able to properly manage and optimize those accounts.
Sure.
And so it is a challenge, whereas and I try to tell them one of the advantages that you have to do when you're building this out is these huge companies that are doing digital marketing, they've scaled it because they're not necessarily in on the account to the level they were when they first started.
Totally.
All right.
1,000%.
Maybe an analyst is going from managing 10 to 15 accounts to now they're managing 60.
Right.
And quite honestly, that when you're doing that, you're spread thin and it's not going to get the same attention. And that's where this set it and forget it mentality happens.
Sure.
So dealers or anybody that's dealing with a digital agency, one of the common complaints or frustrations is going to be, why am I, as the client, always the one coming up with the idea?
Sure.
Why am I the one finding and questioning, why are we doing this? Why isn't that being updated? Why isn't that? Well, it's because they're spread thin.
Sure.
And so I always try to tell them what they've got to do is they've got to innovate their way, ask better questions to find out how can they continue to optimize, all right, and provide the same level of support and growth, right? So that gets back to the scalability that
Sure.
And so one of the things that we've done is it really comes down to just technology and some of the stuff that we've built. How do I automate some of the things that we were doing manually?
1,000%.
So our analysts can focus what they need to do from a manual standpoint and where they have the biggest impact.
Sure.
Right?
And we've created some of these things, right? We've got a learning management system where before we go into the dealership, we'll start sending them a training program. It's pretty simple. It doesn't take a ton of time, but we've created videos that every morning they'll get a 1-minute video.
Nice.
Right? So where
it's nice that it's short too.
It's short, right? It's somebody specific that has tenure in fixed ops, right? So they understand how to talk that talk with the service cashiers.
How many minutes?
Advisors.
I'm curious. Training videos. All right. I love the shortness of what you're doing.
We call it a micro-learning platform because every morning they don't have to log in.
Yeah.
They don't have to do all the things, right? Every morning they get a video, and they could do it all at once, and the total is 12 minutes. I've timed it, right? But every morning they get a 1-minute video.
So I bought some software, some online software that helped me do some things. And the first thing I get when I load it up is instruction videos. And so the first thing in my head is, I got to sit here and learn all this stuff.
Right.
All right. But I went through it, and you know why? Because the longest video was like 4.5 minutes.
Right.
And so the first thing I do when I click on that video is I look at the length of the video.
Of course, right? Yeah.
Because my time's important, right?
Of course.
And so I'm so happy to hear you kept it short. My attention span on learning videos, 8 to 10 minutes, but I really prefer 5 minutes or less.
Sure. I agree. But what's interesting too, it's just, like I said, it's a short, we call it micro-learning, right? So they could do it all at once if they wanted to.
What made you think of that idea?
So I wish I could take the credit. But again, when I was out there just putting all my feelers.
Sandy Cerami, who you know,
Yes,
right?
yes.
He says you're allowed to take the credit after 2 times of giving the credit to the proper person.
Okay, fair enough. So Eric Anderson has been in and around the space. And, like I said, when I first got back in it, I wanted to talk to everybody. And I told him a little bit about what I was wanting to do. And he told me about a platform that he'd built. And so we just started working together. And he helped me trick it out and make it cool. And at the end of the videos, there's a quiz. It's specifically custom to the dealership to the point where We even talk about if there's an issue. If you have a heat case, how do we handle it, right? We know that ahead of time. And if there's a heat case, who do you talk to, right? And so in one of my dealer groups, it's you talk to the head guy. If you don't like it, you talk to the head guy, right? And that's in a quiz. And at the end of it, they get a certificate. They've completed it. And although that may sound a little bit silly, when I went into a store the other day, somebody had it printed out. They were proud that they'd finished it. And it's really just a mindset thing, right? Are we teaching them ahead of time? Are we helping their employees handle it? And if they have new employees, we just quickly enroll them and they're done. Yeah. So again, part of that scalability is key, right? So that we can launch a 12-store group in a couple of weeks and be out the door.
So the video helps you scale because...
Sure.
Correct.
Right. So I feel like as far as challenges and looking for the opportunities, it took me some time to research it because the dealer would go, no way, I'm not going to mess with my CSI because I'm going to trip over, quarters to pick up pennies.
So let me ask you this question. All right?
Okay.
You've got audience people out there listening. They got great clients, a lot of repeat business.
Sure.
Now you're going to change that pricing structure. Hey, this used to cost $10. Now it's going to cost you $10.05.
Sure.
Or whatever.
Right.
The search, or you can pay cash and pay however you want to position it.
Of course.
Now you got a business owner who justifiably is concerned about their customer satisfaction.
Of course.
Right? And this is any industry. So what's your answer to that? How do you respond to those people?
So it will happen. You will have some people that will give you pushback. There's no question about it. And you will also be surprised how many people don't give you pushback, right? So there's two sides of that same coin. Mm-hmm. And so we have a couple of strategies that we use. First of all, because it's a dual price strategy as opposed to a surcharge, we feel like just in the way that we position it to the customer, we feel like it is received in a better way. Okay, so that would be the first thing. And we train all the employees accordingly and signage and all the things, right? This isn't a fee. As a matter of fact, one of our quiz questions is this a fee? And all the answers are no. And the correct answer is all of the above, right? Because it's not a fee. It's simply a dual price strategy. And although that feels like semantics, it's important, right? Because they get fees on fees on fees, right? So that's one piece of it. But then I would also say that we have a cool program that we have implemented that's a gift card program, okay? So let's talk about a dealer saving $10,000 a month, which is not out of bounds, right? The savings we typically see is between $5,000 and $15,000, okay? And so what we'll do is we'll create a gift card program. And it'll be slicked out and have the dealership's name and all of that stuff. If you get a frustrated customer, you simply tell them, okay, and let's talk about an average ticket amount. So the average RO is $250. We're talking about $7.50 here. But let's say, Mrs. Jones has been coming to you for 14 years and she is hot about it. She is mad and she doesn't like it. Yeah. Quite frankly, Mrs. Jones, here's a $100 gift card to ABC Toyota. We understand that's a brand new policy and we appreciate all your tenure in business, but this $100 will pay for your fees for the rest of the year and maybe into next year. It doesn't expire. Just come back and see us. Well, first of all, now you're roaming around in their wallet. You've got $100. They're coming back to your store. Typically, they'll spend 38% more than they have on the gift card, and there will be some that never use it at all, right? So again, that's just one of the strategies that we use, to help the customer.
People don't understand the psychology of what you just said. Some people do, a lot of people do, but there are also a lot of people who don't. I was given a $500 gift card, all right, free money to shop at this store in New York. And I'm like, okay, what's my minimum? The first thing, because I'm in marketing, right? What's the minimum I have to spend?
What's my disclaimer say?
What's my minimum I have to spend to get my 500?
Sure.
Do you know how much that was?
How much?
None.
Nice.
I could literally walk into the store and buy a $500 item
and leave
and pay nothing other than the tax. All right?
Okay.
So I thought, well, hell, this is a real $500.
Yeah.
So,
and we want them to think the same. And dealers will go, well, $100, that's kind of a lot. Well, that's the point. Are you really going to be frustrated that you just got $100?
Well, I spent $2,500.
Of course you did.
When I went in. And that goes to the point you're making there, is that from a marketing, people don't understand that psychology. Listen, it is hard to resist because most people go in there and they want this and they want that and they want all this other stuff. That's the same thing applies.
Sure.
Yeah. And if they, and from even if they just spent the 100 and every dealer might have some type of disclaimer on that, or any business
Of
might.
course.
But even worse comes, let's say they don't want to do that. What if I'm not giving, my customers are complaining about that. You can always just waive the fee, couldn't you?
Of course you can. You don't want to get into a place where, but yes, we have places where you can override in the system.
Okay.
And so you don't want to get to, what we've learned the hard way is you don't want to give them an opportunity to waive fees. It has to be from the higher ups, right? In specific circumstances. But of course, if you have a customer, even right out of the gates, if they had a $3,000 issue and they had quoted it before they started the program, of course you honor the price that you quoted them.
Yeah.
And even if you feel like you need to, the amount of savings that you're going to get from a program like this, because we're talking about net dollars, it's going to outweigh anything you do to appease the customer. Because although you think there will be a lot of frustrated customers, we see anywhere between 3 and 5%.
So this episode's all about how to recognize new profit opportunities, and really it was about me interviewing you and your ability to recognize it. You kind of have a product, and I just thought of this. You kind of have a product that is something other business owners should be recognizing as a new opportunity. They're not increasing their top line.
No.
What they're doing is they're increasing profits, a profit opportunity, because you're eliminating an expense that in the past was just an expense. If you were going to do business, this was
a cost of
something
doing
you had
business.
to, yeah.
Sure.
And so,
Sure.
and now you have the option to offset that or eliminate it.
Well, and it's interesting because I had a very candid conversation with the CFO last week, and he quite frankly just does not like the philosophy of it.
Yeah.
He is against it. He doesn't like it. He said, but it's not my decision. I have a fiduciary responsibility to my owner to tell them in his stores he could save $1 million this year. I mean,
the stores are going to like it.
well, and that's right, right? And you get the people in the room that their paychecks are affected by it. That's a different conversation, right? And so it was funny. He said initially he wanted me to table it, but I knew I had a responsibility to tell him how much we'd be saving. And so to me, it's all about execution.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, no question. And that falls on us, right? I've learned that the hard way. We started launching some dealers and realized that we needed more training. We needed in-person. We needed to do all the right things to make that happen. We needed some specific reporting for accounting to make their job easier, right? But that's just like, that's how you bob and weave and make it better. And otherwise you just sit and go, it's funny. They say Microsoft launched with 40,000 bugs.
Yeah. Well, they always launch with, but they never launch.
Sometimes you feel like that, right?
Yeah.
But you just have to push through and go, what are the biggest obstacles that I have to overcome here?
Well, it doesn't matter how many quality checks and different things you do to try and anytime you're eliminating, software is easy to talk about bugs, but there are process bugs.
Sure.
Right? There are things
the developer isn't in a live situation to understand how it's really going to flow with the customer.
Correct. But even there are bugs in how you deliver your training in your videos.
Sure.
There are bugs in
we're definitely on our second and third iteration.
The product as a whole has bugs
Absolutely.
because, wow, it falls short here, but I really need this. I really want that. You probably came up with the training videos after you heard dealers saying, how can I get this? I need you to teach my people. I need you to do this.
Totally.
And so you're like, well, how do I scale that?
Yes.
Because I can't be doing this all day.
Right.
Which leads me to a question. In your opinion, because now you've been doing this long enough to see the difference. Is it easier or harder today to start off in the business world, say between now and say the 17 years ago?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So at 24, I didn't have kids, didn't have a mortgage, didn't have a husband, didn't have a boy. It didn't matter, right? I was 24, so I could work 80 hours a week, which I really was always a hard worker. I loved to do it, right? So that didn't matter. But now I have to be really deliberate with my time and my energy and my efforts, right? So for me, it's probably different. But at the same time, as I start a new business in dealer merchant services, I'm thrilled with the experience and the scar tissue and the knowledge, right? Because that has made me better, right? I mean, you go into your first business with naivete and unicorns and fairies and and then you really get kicked around a couple of pretty good times and you go, okay, well, am I going to get up? Am I still going to be an entrepreneur? Am I going to go get a job? Right? I mean, that every entrepreneur's faced that. And for me, I'm a terrible employee. So I would say that if you're willing to put forth the effort, grind it out if you need to, sure, I think it doesn't matter.
Do you think it's harder?
I think the
easier?
opportunities are there. You just have to uncover them. They're everywhere.
Is it harder or easier today?
For me, I feel like it's easier than it was when I was 24 because I know more, right? You can figure out what those resources are. I think you're better at listening to your gut. I think you're better at going, oh, wow, I got the inclination that was a bad decision, but I did it anyway. Yeah. If I was to do it again, I would have listened a little bit more to my gut. And that sounds very ooey gooey, but I think there's not an entrepreneur out there that didn't say, when I got that gut feeling and I listened, this is what happened, and it was good.
So when I ask that, I always think, how would I answer that question? And my answer is always, it's easier today, just simply because I'm sitting here thinking, wow, if I had the ability to do all these things I can do today, back then life would have been easier. But surprisingly, when I ask that question, I get it's about 50-50 with the various experts I get, and age has nothing to do with it. Like, I've interviewed people that have been in business 50 years, and they just, it's all over the board. And that's shock. I was really shocked because I really assumed that everyone would say easier.
Really?
Yeah, but they don't. And so you and I have. But
sure.
Does that shock you?
I think that it's a matter of, like, this particular opportunity with Dealer Merchant Services. Yep. This wouldn't have been here 5 years ago.
How would you have scaled it? Let me ask you this question.
Okay.
Let's go back 17 years.
Okay.
All right. There is no internet that's reliable. It's there, but you're not going to be able to do the video stuff that you're doing now.
Sure.
So the same challenge would have existed.
No question.
So the dealer still would have been saying, I need my people to better understand how to do this. Go back in time. What would your solution have been?
I think that I think we've had so much in-person training. There had to have been a way to automate it, right? There had to have been a way, right? I mean, even if you go back to...
Well, that's the part of you now that knows the internet, that sees no boundaries.
I would have run myself ragged, I'm sure, trying to figure it out, right? Gone to every dealership in the country at the time, right? Yeah. Figure it out. But, I think the other thing too, and I'm sure you realize this, is when you have some key people that are smarter than you, right, that have another way to figure it out, because you get these blinders on as the owner and the founder that goes, okay, I've got to work on profitability. I've got to work on this. And they go, well, did he think about it this way? And you go, no, that's great. Okay, go. Yeah. Right? So if you get a team around you that can think, that's gold.
All right. So is there a particular story that takes you back in your early parts and growing all this and adapting and changing as the marketplace does that we haven't kind of covered yet before we move on to the more interesting questions?
Well, when I was first starting out, I was 24. I looked about 17. I think I've told you a little part of this story, but it's fun to think about because I look like a baby. So I never told anybody I was the owner for a full solid year because I didn't think anybody'd believe me. And so I'd sit across from clients that I'd worked with before and told them I was with this new company and, they'd want to negotiate with me and I would call my own voicemail and pretend like I had some gray-haired man on the other end of the line giving me permission to give them a discount, right? So, I look back on that and some of the really big mistakes, that I made that you figure out, okay, that was the wrong phone number and it went to 1-800-toilets instead of the Honda store it was supposed to go to. You don't make those same mistakes ever again. So, and you know where to put them in the new business, right? Yeah. You make sure that you get that right the next time. So.
Yeah. All right. So let's switch gears.
Okay.
All right. We talked a lot about early on, but to me, now that you've got this 17 years of experience, right? It's better and I think more valuable for the people listening if we sit there and say, all right, if you could do then what you know now, what would you do, right? Because that's what they want to hear.
Sure.
They want to hear, they're listening to podcasts and shows like this because they want to shorten the learning curve.
No doubt.
All right. So if you could go back in time, all right, knowing what you do now, and you can pick one company or just your career in general, but let's stay focused on recognizing new opportunities, right?
Sure.
What would you do differently?
What would I do differently?
Yep.
Well, I think there's a few things that I think as an entrepreneur you get right and you get wrong, right? And for me, I was so focused on selling that I needed to make sure I looked at the numbers. Okay, that's one thing it was not my strong suit, right?
How do you, when you say look at the numbers, you're talking about your financial statement?
All of, not just a financial statement, right? But knowing your numbers 100%, right? Yeah. So when they tell you to soar with your strengths and manage your weaknesses, I would have gotten somebody into that position right out of the gates.
That is a weakness that a lot of entrepreneurs face because that's not where their strength is the idea and or the execution of the idea, right? Executing it out there. And quite honestly, for a lot of them, I think the numbers bore them, right?
They bore me,
but it's impossible to make great decisions to move forward.
So I would say that that's the piece of it, right? Is making sure it's great to put goals out there and all of those things, but you have to have and know the numbers. And so for me, I've got a whole board of numbers now, right? Because
what is it that you measure for yourself?
Well, I want to know my revenue, right? But I have to take it even down to a smaller figure, right? How many people am I calling on? How many pitches have I made, right? What's my closing ratio? I mean, let's be real, that's an important piece of it. What's it costing me to launch a brand new dealership group? Whether it's the marketing piece, whether it's dealer merchant services, right?
Why is that important? Why is it important to know what it costs to acquire and launch?
Because you have to know if I want 300 dealers in the next 24 to 36 months, I have to know what it's going to take there to get there from a capital standpoint, right? But as a 24-year-old girl, I had $5,000 when I started, right? And that was everything I had. It was my cash flow. And I was lucky to be in a business that has cash flow, right? You sell something, you get paid. You sell something, you get paid. Well, most businesses don't start off that way. Correct. And dealer merchant services is no different, right? I had significant upfront costs, but I also had to know exactly what my runway was, right? That's a huge piece of it is how long can your cash flow survive until you get some revenue? How many customers do you have to sell to get to that watershed moment, right? And how many conversations do you have to get to that closing? And how long does it take for the closing to get to the dollars, right? To receive that revenue. And each business is different. And I would tell you as my 24-year-old self, all I wanted to do was sell it and produce it, right? And at the time I had my mom doing my QuickBooks and accounting, and it was very rudimentary. But as you grow, you can't let that sit on the sidelines. And that I think you learn the hard way. You learn the hard way because you get stolen from, right? I've certainly had some of that happen. We were doing $400,000 a month in revenue. Well, I took my eye off the ball, right? And it's easy to make that money go away, and it doesn't have to be very much money.
So much easier for it to leave than it is to come in.
Exactly, right? So to me, I would say that would be the single most important thing, especially for me, because it wasn't my strong suit.
So if you had to do one thing different, it would have been to dive in and know the numbers and pay more attention, and or to make sure that you had someone in place that could really keep your eye on that blind spot.
Right, it's so easy to go, I'm busy, right? What's the difference between, the urgent and the important, right? What does that really look like? Well, as a business owner, you typically are constantly being taken out to sea with the urgent and the important, right? And so the numbers don't feel like, oh, well, it's coming in, money's happening, it's going in and out, all of these things. Well, but if you really don't know, you really don't know. Yeah. And that I really learned the hard way, big time.
I would also say there's another advantage to knowing your acquisition and ramp up costs per new client.
Oh, for sure.
And that
I've talked to businesses where they've got this guy in there that's a, SMU MBA guy, and he says, oh, I'm going to put 5% of my revenue to marketing. Yeah. That's great, except when you have no revenue.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, if you know a client, if you know it cost you a client $100, your total cost of goods,
Right.
marketing. I'm going to keep the math simple.
Sure.
$100 to set up the whole thing out the door, right? That's my hard cost, my people, the whole thing. That's what
Right.
it is. And you keep trying to manage to a gross up front of $400 or $500,000, whatever it is.
Sure.
A lot of times your most profitable thing is the reoccurring revenue and or the upsell and cross-sell that comes from the follow-up. There's a reason the money's in the follow-up, right?
Totally.
And it's not just by following up with people you didn't sell. It's also monetizing the relationship and growing your share of wallet with that customer. So
maintaining that customer is so much less expensive than getting a new one.
If you know what your true acquisition cost is, and you make more money on the backside than the front,
Sure.
then why are you trying to sell people for $500 to $1,000? Why not just get them in at $100, and ramp up and get as many of those clients as possible, and then start your back end selling?
Sure, but I think there's a lot of diminishing returns there, right? Because at least for me, as I was
I'm talking about any business. It doesn't have to be break even. It could be whatever you want to do.
Of course, sure. I think, again, going back to there's so many ways to skin the cat as far as numbers go. Of course, you need to be looking at your financial statement, but here I'm 24, right? Like, you want me to look at I have no idea what I'm looking at, right? Yeah. Did I make money? That was all, how much money did I make? Well, it's not that simple, right? And so those are things I think you learn the hard way that I couldn't impress upon a new entrepreneur enough.
So that's what you would have done different. What would you have done more of?
I would have done a better job of bucketing my schedule legitimately. Like, they tell you that in all the courses that you learn about, but realistically saying, okay, these are my 5 priorities. This has to be done during this time, because I would have done a better job at making sure that accounting hour was happening every week, right? Instead of feeling like, oh, I've got this huge burden of accounting and I don't know when I'm going to get to it, or what, I don't even know how to tackle it. And then it becomes bigger and bigger and more overwhelming. Is that literally every week you have that accounting hour to handle as much as you can get done during that hour, or my prospecting hour. Or quite frankly, as an entrepreneur, you never turn it off that, okay, today I sit with my kids. I don't look at my phone. I'm not getting dressed. I'm not doing the thing. Today's that day. This is that time. And so I would say, now even more than before, because I have a family, is bucketing that time. Okay. And I feel like I would have ramped up faster if I knew how to really schedule those things and make it make sense.
All younger people, that inexperienced people coming into the business world, one of the things they always seem to want more of is time management skills.
Sure.
So, which is what you're alluding
well,
to.
and it's so easy for us to get taken out to sea, right, with our phones. It's so easy. You have to be deliberate when you pick that thing up, because you know that there are going to be things that you're immediately going to have to respond to. And so you pick it up and think, okay, I'm going to send my customer this email. Well, instead you've got 14 text messages and 3 phone calls to return, and now you've forgotten what you've had to do, right? So I think that now, even more than ever, I think it's a conscious practice. I don't think it ever gets, I mean, certainly we're all guilty of it, right?
What would you do less of?
I would do a lot less worrying. I know that sounds very cliche.
It's one of the worst things you can do.
Right, is that when I look back on it, and for me, I have a morning routine, and that seems like, of course you hear about that, but once you finally hone in and get your own, and it's specific to you, then you can't have a day without it, right?
Correct.
So I would have probably done that sooner, for sure.
Yeah.
I was also burning the candle at both ends,
Yep.
right? I was young, right? I could work all day and drink a bottle or 2 or wine, and then drink a bunch of coffee and do it over and over and over again.
We do bourbon.
Bourbon. I don't do bourbon, but I'll take some scotch with you next time on the 4th box. But I would say I would worry less, right? And I would take...
You heard how we make scotch in Kentucky.
I heard.
Right.
I heard.
I'll spare the audience the story, but go ahead.
So I would say less worrying, right? And just taking those action steps. Really, that sounds very ooey gooey to not worry less, but you just kind of get in your own way. And if you let that worry catch too much momentum, you really start to lose. Yeah, I think Grant Cardone says it. He says the scariest person is not the person trying to become a millionaire, right? He says when you are a millionaire, you're so worried about losing it. Mm-hmm. And so then your energy and your focus changes.
Or you think that you've already arrived, but and you stop doing what got you there. But
Yeah.
you know, when you worry, first off, what you're worrying about rarely happens.
For sure.
And when you worry, you experience in many times the same level of pain as if whatever you're worrying about actually happened.
Right.
Most of the time it doesn't happen, or it's definitely not as bad as what you put in your head.
For sure.
But more importantly, when you worry, you don't tap in. It really restricts your creativity. You don't hit your potential in other areas. And so, or other things that you might be working on.
Well,
so,
I would say that visionaries, just like you, entrepreneurs, they consider themselves visionaries because they're listening at all the various things that are going on and honing in on that one thing that works. And I would say that when you're worrying, you're not listening. You're not focusing on what the solution is. You're only focused on the problem. And so then you can't come up with a great solution. Just like you're saying, the creativity piece of it is huge.
yeah. What would you do faster?
I would definitely, I think hiring the key people,
Yep.
right? Probably templating the
Well, that
programs.
helps you with the money. That also helps you on the money side
Sure.
as well.
I would say many more templates, right? Even as silly as it sounds, email templates, program templates, right? How can you punch it out and make it the same every time to where it makes sense as opposed to a custom job here and a this and that. And so I feel like, and some of that I've learned from my parents and my dad. You know, he started out as a boutique type of a manufacturing firm, and now it's all about scalability, right?
What was a complete waste of your time? And this will go, let me ask this two ways.
Okay.
What was a complete waste of your time that if you had to go back, you just wouldn't have even messed with? But where do you see business leaders wasting a lot of time today?
So I would say if I had to do it all over again as far as wasting time and resources, is that I had employees that were superfluous, meaning that as I grew, I thought I needed more graphic designers and more production people and more insights.
People with the problem.
Right. And I feel like there actually could have been a better way, which is the way I do it now. I don't have a huge staff like I did. And I have outside contractors that are graphic designers that they want to hustle because that's their job.
Right.
Right? It's not because I'm paying them $50,000 a year.
And what's great is the faster they get the project done,
it's their business.
they can go on to the next project.
Sure.
And it's also important to them to get it done and do it well, because you're not going to keep going back to the same designers that don't produce good work.
Well, and then I got to a place where I was just, I couldn't make that jump, right? I had all these people. I wasn't making any more money. I was just feeding more people.
Right.
I was putting out more fires. It wasn't fun anymore.
Yeah.
So I would say that really figuring out, is there a resource? Could you pay even a small premium for a better graphic designer that you don't have to have on staff, that you don't have to pay their insurance, right?
Right.
So yeah, and those you learn the hard way, right? Could you find a vendor that had a production staff that could help you do most of the lion's share of the work, so then you could really just focus on the selling, right? Because the relationship piece is where over the last 17 years has served me, right? I would have never been able to launch dealer merchant services if I didn't have the Rolodex that I do in the automotive space.
Now you already said your dad. Who are the big players? So you got to say someone else.
Sure.
Who are the big players that you've learned from, or did you have mentors or along the way?
Listen, I'm so lucky, and I have a very strong mom. Okay, no big surprise there, right? You meet me and you go, "What's her mom like?" Well, she's a firecracker, right? She's got I've got 3 brothers, which serves me in the automotive space for sure, because I love dealing with my dealers. They're great, right? Some of the most resilient and successful entrepreneurs that you could ever be around, right? And so my brothers are entrepreneurs. My dad.
Did your brothers tease you a lot?
Not for very long. No.
Well, see, that's probably why it works out well for you in auto, because in auto, I had this conversation out of prior. Yeah, you have to stay, and quite honestly, it's a unique culture, right?
Of course.
There's a lot of trash talk. There's a lot of that type of like.
Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
And COVID is really one of those things.
They love to tease. They love to jab. They love to poke.
Sure.
And so you got to be able to take it and, more importantly, give it back.
Of course.
If they're not doing that to you, they probably don't like you.
They don't. You just have to know if it's a vanilla conversation, it's not going anywhere as far as the relationship.
Exactly.
So But as far as mentor, I mean, my mom's a firecracker, right? She doesn't mess around. She's very, very smart, very well educated, very resourceful. Yeah. So that's a huge piece of it. That sounds, again, very cliche, but she's a strong woman. My dad always supported me being an entrepreneur.
You couldn't bring up your dad again.
I know. He's a good one, though. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. He was a developer here in Dallas. Okay. And so I think it just wasn't a surprise for them when I said, I want to do this on my own. And when I said, I'm going to start another business, they go, okay. And sometimes they're a big hit. It's not like these two businesses are my only businesses I've ever started, but I learn on every one of them, right?
When you're going into a new opportunity, I'll first ask, what concerns you most about it?
You have to go back to the numbers, right? You see these people starting businesses and you think, do you not realize you're going to have to sell?
But this could be whether you're starting a new business and or even just having some type of new product,
sure,
or something like that, right? So, I mean, go ahead, though.
Well, what I was going to say is you have to know those numbers. How many T-shirts are you going to have to sell to make this thing go? Well, for me, I'm lucky when it came to marketing, right? Again, you could sell it. You know exactly what you're going to make, and you can get paid in a few days. That's a great business to be in, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that the other thing you asked me about mentors, I would say when I was very first starting out in the business, I had a lot of really great clients that said, Amberly, I just have to tell you, I think if you did this or that, it may serve you. And so I was always listening, and I was grateful. I always had dealers that would give me their feedback in a way that was productive for me. So I would say my dealer body has been a huge piece of that. And I'll call on my favorite dealers now and say, can I bend your ear about something? And they'll tell me honestly what they think.
And I think that if what screams, if you're people listening to this interview and paying attention, what jumps off the page is you listen. So in other words, I'm hearing all the ideas you've come up with, whether it's from the marketing company and different things, how that evolved for you, and or dealer merchant services, and where that even idea to do that even came up, and or improve the service level that you've provided. It's all come from these customers.
Oh, sure. 1,000%. I mean, you have to think, I certainly didn't sell my first dealer when I pitched him dealer merchant services. I mean, it's one of those things that I went back and go, maybe he's right. Maybe we can't do this. Okay, well, what do we do? And you think, okay, you do have to listen. And I would say so many dealers, I've been grateful that at least they'll answer my questions. Like, what do you really think about this?
I interviewed a very prominent businessman, says he wasted 20 years of his life because his ego and just stubbornness of wanting to sell what he believed. He wanted to change the industry. He wanted to sell this instead of just listening to what his customers actually wanted. He says it cost him, he'll throw out $1 billion. We'll say millions. But I think that's accurate.
Well, that's where Dealer Merchant Services was born, is that you're having conversations with guys and they say, I can't afford your marketing. I'm spending too much money. Okay, well, what are you spending it on?
So would your advice be to sell less and talk and ask more?
There's never been...
We tend to talk to customers, right? We get into this, well, I've got to hit my number. I got to talk to this many people. I've got to do this. And so it's sell, sell, sell. But maybe there needs to be a time where you're in those conversations. You always make sure you block time within the call to show a sincere interest in what their problems are.
Well, listen, working with dealers, we love them. They're not scared to talk about themselves, right? It doesn't take very many questions to ask them before you get an enormous amount of information about their business, but also about them, right? And I would say that some of my dealers I've worked with for 17 years, right? I mean, they're still my customers. So, and I know about their families. I know about their business. I know about their lives. And again, those are the ones that I can pick up the phone and go, hey, I've got something new. What do you think? I'm not trying to sell you. I really want to know what your feedback is. Will you give it to me? And they always will.
Yeah.
So they like to talk about themselves. I guess we all do.
Well, I also think most human beings want to help other people.
Oh, I think so too.
And so I think the business leaders I talk to are very giving when it comes to that type of stuff.
Sure. I mean, they're excited about it, right? I would say that, in general, I mean, I've certainly been thrown out of a few dealerships, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I cold called dealerships between Houston and the Mexican border. I had to it was one of those things where I had kind of a strategy. When I first started, I'd go and I'd ask the receptionist if I could see the general manager. And of course, she'd tell me no or give me his email, and I'd never hear from him again. So then I would go in the side door and ask the point person on the salesperson, hey, where's the general manager? Oh, it's that guy right there. Okay, cool. And I just stand in front of his office till he'd see me.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think you have to pivot and figure it out for sure.
Yeah.
But dealers are great. They're so much fun. The pace of the business is fun. I mean, I love being in this vertical.
Yeah.
I wouldn't change it.
It's an exciting vertical. To me, I always like learning from outside. So one of the things I wanted to do when we started the show is I didn't want just automotive.
Sure.
Because for one, I think the people listening in automotive that are in automotive can hopefully listen to a bunch of the other episodes. We've done Tom Bullitt, we've done Cardone, just did Brad Lee. We've done probably about 50% of our stuff is non-automotive. I just feel like there's so much to learn from businesses that are very successful, even outside the vertical. And the reason for it is I'm always looking for the ideas that all my competitors aren't doing.
Sure.
And that's what's going to help dealers too. The breakthroughs come, real wealth is created, or real wealth is created with breakthroughs, right? And so breakthroughs happen not by copying and doing, or it's by looking at another industry, and maybe I went to a hotel or and experienced some type of just great customer service.
Sure.
And I'm like, you know what? And I keep my eyes wide open, and I'm looking at it through the set of eyes. How can I take that idea, what they're doing? How can I take that business application and apply it to my own?
Sure.
Right? To improve our customer experience or our service. So you had already said, I think one of the ideas, and I don't remember, it might have been the videos, you said that wasn't your idea, but that's you recognized that from something else and brought it into your world.
Sure, it was a simple conversation. Is he started his business, he scaled it, he grew it, and he sold it. And I wanted to know exactly what he did. And so that was where the conversation went, right? Is expressing that I wanted to build a company that was scalable. When I embarked upon this, I had no question in my mind. I didn't want to do anything but be a scalable company.
Right.
Because even if I never sold it, right, is that it was really more about could I create it and me personally walk away and have it still run. And that's always been something that, quite frankly, was fascinating to me. Like, how are these businesses doing that? Right. Because when I first started, it was like, okay, there's no more hours in the day. How am I going to grow this company? Right. And so I've always wanted to learn that. There's a podcast that it's called Exit Strategy, right? And because it's these amazing businesses that all they care about is scalability. Yeah. And
Exit Strategy. I'm going to listen to that.
Yeah. So I think that as long as
if you guys do we're giving you a cheap plug here.
Right. So I think that as far as all of it goes, I think the scalability piece of it, all of it, but learning, just like this CEO of Venmo, right? I started to realize in the space, there were companies out there that were doing surcharging or this and that are similar, but they didn't focus on automotive. But quite frankly, they validated the need, right? They already said, okay, this is changing. The consumer behavior is changing. The businesses want change. And so it just made sense. But you couldn't just have a processor with our type of program and walk it into a dealership. It would never work.
I don't want to say out market. I will out business any business owner that has the belief that works in that industry, but it won't work in mine. It's no different than the dealer that says you can't do that in this market.
Sure.
All right. When I hear that, and if I'm buying a store in that market, my eyes just light up. I'm like, oh, good. This is going to be easy. Right. Right. And
that antiquated mentality.
And I don't want to be cocky about that, but that is the wrong mentality. What works in other industries will work in every industry.
Sure.
And so when it comes to doing things easier, doing things faster, doing things for less money for people, saving people money, right? Saving time, effort, money. If you're seeing that done in another industry, you need to be looking at it and saying, how can I apply that to my business? Because it will work in any industry.
Sure.
People will always want to do those three things. Never fail.
For sure.
All right. So what final thoughts do you have to help motivate business leaders who might, they want to take this leap. They want to jump onto new ideas, new projects. There's a lot of them out there that might be gun shy. Maybe they've tried new things in the past, and so they get a little fearful of that type of stuff, right? What would you say to motivate them?
Well, I would say that if you have an intention, right, whatever that looks like for you, like for me, I always wanted to build a business that, at least in this second phase, right, a business that I was proud of, that I could also be a mom, right, be a wife, and have a family, right? I didn't have that in my 1.0 version, right? It was just work all the time, and that was it. But I would say if I am very deliberate with my intent, then I can make it happen, right? But if I'm flailing all over the place and all these things, so to me, I think just that one word, intention, what is your intention? What's your intention with your customer? For me, is it saving them money? Is it helping them be more successful? What's your intention with your time? What's my intention with this hour spent with you? Is to tell you everything I know. I'm proud of it. I'm excited about it, right? And make sure you feel that and see that from me, right? And so I think that one piece of it, just that one part, being intentional, would keep you on track.
So let me ask you a question. I asked you all those questions about what would you do differently and faster and less of and all that. When you started Dealer Merchant Services, did you apply those things? What were some of the biggest, what was the relationship between how you started that one versus your initial company?
Okay, great question. So for me, again, I mentioned a little bit about my morning routine. I am, since my brain surgery, again, I had to be very intentional in every piece of my life, right? My
Not
health.
to be insensitive, but did it make you smarter?
It did. It did. It made me so much smarter. And Scott, I can write off all the bad decisions from my 30s.
There you go.
Okay, I'm sorry. I can blame it on the brain tumor.
Yeah.
I'm fine, right? So, but I was very intentional. So I'm a big time believer in meditation.
Yeah.
I'm a big time believer in yoga and energy work and that. But to me, that's what worked for me. It worked in my recovery because my surgery was very intense. The recovery was very intense. Yeah. So for me, that's a part of it. But as silly as it sounds, every morning I sit in a journal and I'm very general, right? I want to bring tremendous value to my customers, right? I want to be thriving. I want to be having fun. I want for things to flow. And then I also write down my goals, right? I mean, DI by itself will do a little over $1 million in revenue this year. And I intend for Dealer Merchant Services to have 300 dealers in the next 36 months. It's awesome. It's a huge number. It's on my board when I walk into my closet every morning, right? Yep. And those are things I sincerely, I write them down every day. Yep. And at first it wasn't about, I need to sell 5 dealers, this, that, or the next thing. That's too specific, right? But I want to have amazing relationships, right? And not just with my family, but also with my customers. Yeah. I want to bring tremendous value. I want to be thriving. So that's a piece of it. Those very general things have always kind of unfolded perfectly since I started being very intentional about that. Yeah. And it's true. I mean, the right opportunities, the right solutions, the right people have just kind of fallen into place because I stayed true to, okay, if I bring tremendous value and I want to build tremendous value for my customers and I want to thrive and I want to have fun, what does that look like?
Right.
Right?
Yep.
It doesn't have to be, I want to make this many dollars this year and that's it. That's not the only thing I want. No. I mean, of course, I love to make money just like anybody else, but I want to have a good time doing it. And that was one part of when I was starting DI, I stopped having fun. Yeah. Right? It was really a chore.
I've always been more successful in my business when I focus on the customer versus the dollar.
For sure.
And so, in other words, because what happens is when you focus on the customer, right, you are providing more value. You're always thinking about how can I give them more of this? How will they like this better? How will they? How is this easier for them to use? Whatever it is.
Sure. But I
And the
think it
money
takes
just
it one
comes.
step further, is that it's really not as much about the customers, is what kind of experience do I want to have in this relationship? What kind of experience do I want them to have?
It's more fulfilling.
Sure.
There's nothing fulfilling about selling something that in the end they don't see as valuable.
Sure.
And-
And that's how it shifted with direct mail. Direct mail wasn't working the same way towards the end of kind of DI 1.0 as
Right.
it was in the beginning, right? And
Yeah.
so I had dealers that I'd been working with for years, 10 years, and say, Amberly, I love you, you're great, but this isn't working.
Right.
Okay, I got to find something different. I got to find something new. So.
All right. Well, Amberly Joseph, everyone, I want to thank her for sharing her knowledge, her experience. I am positive everybody got a lot out of this. I know I did.
Thank you.
I am Scott Joseph. I'm your host. Thank you to the Move, Crush, Count Nation for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.